Will Donald Trump's tariffs that he's creating completely drain the gold market in the UK? Why are we watching record amounts of gold leave the UK and go to the US? These are some really interesting questions I think a lot of people are not asking themselves, and it gets even more interesting when we consider the fact that the world's richest man, Elon Musk, right now wants to audit the Federal Reserve. So I think when we start talking about this rabbit hole of a supply suffocation happening in the gold space, we need to think, okay, if we do see a supply suffocation in the gold space, what impacts will this have in the Bitcoin space? So those are some questions I want to explore here, Rob, regarding gold. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's very interesting. Let's start with Trump's tariffs and JP Morgan flying gold from London to New York. Have you seen this? And what are your takes on the supply suffocation that we're watching manifest in the gold market? Because by any account and by all the charts that I've seen, we're seeing some things that we have not seen in a long time. Have a look at this one, for example. These are the daily changes in the amount of gold that's flowing into the COMEX. We can also see that right now, this is hitting 2020 panic levels. Right now, the panic that we're seeing in the three big gold vaults, it's bigger than what we saw in 2020 when there was a massive run on physical gold and silver. When we were at the peak of that, let's call it the hysteria, the 2020 hysteria fears that we saw. And I think it's fascinating that we're seeing some similar things materialize here in 2024 at a time when gold right now is actually at an all-time high.
Yeah, weird things are afoot. You can see it all started in December, right? After Trump was elected, the gold started leaving the London vaults and started heading back to New York in the COMEX vaults. So what does this mean? I think that we have an administration that has put in place that knows that the jig is up, right? I mean, Trump in his first term added $8 trillion to the national debt. Biden added $8 trillion to the national debt. It's an addiction that this country has, and no president before Trump on his second term really seemed like they were willing or wanted to deal with this. But it seems like the people that are around Trump now realize that we got to get ahead of this before it's too late. And so now they're making moves. And some of these are clandestine, as I think we're seeing with this gold market. They aren't going to tell you out loud that they are going to start a new hard money era before all the ducks are in a row, right? So they got to do some things secretly. And so what do I think is happening? I think they're repatriating the gold. They're getting the gold out of London and getting it back on American soil. And so what do you see? You see the LBMA, the major gold market in London. Usually, if you requested your gold, they would send it to you within a couple of days, 2 to 4 days max. Now they're saying 4 to 8 weeks to get your gold. That means that, hey, that means they don't have it, right? It's sort of like a soft default. They need that much time. They need a month or two to source it, to get it, to send it to you. So, and I mean, the cost to borrow gold went up like 300% in a matter of hours 2 weeks ago, right? So gold is being called for from around the world. People want it physically in their own jurisdiction so they can get their hands on it. They don't trust these bankers in London to be sitting on it. And as we've seen for the last 3 years, central banks have been buying a record amount of gold each year. So I think it's central banks were buying, I think it was around 11,000 tons per year for the last 3 years. These central banks realize that this debt game, the jig is up, right? And so you need something to back your currency, to show that your country is worth its weight, and hard money is it. And we live in an analog era previously where gold was the only option, but now we've got Bitcoin as digital hard money as well. And it seems as if America is getting into that game too.
Well, you said a couple of very interesting things there, Rob, about the central bank supply squeeze I think we're seeing. Central banks right now are buying gold for the first time, really, in 50 years. So post 2008, we saw this fundamental shift. That's what this chart here is showing us. So the blue bars is showing us the net purchases of gold. And since 2008, for the first time in a long time, we've seen a decade of consistent demand and buyer pressure coming from central banks. And I think, 2008 really woke people up to the fact that the Ponzi is over. The gig is up. These guys, like you said, they don't have the gold, which I think is crazy. You mentioned something else about a wait time for gold in the UK exploding. I also saw something similar, and it's absolutely crazy that right now they're making you wait, 8 weeks, 6 weeks? They don't have it. They do not have the physical thing.
No, and I mean, some people are saying that for each kilogram of gold in these vaults, there's up to 100 people who have a claim on it, right? This thing has been rehypothecated out endlessly, up to 100 times. And that's the problem with gold, is that you can't verify it. If it's sitting there in a vault, they could say, if say Switzerland buys it from France, they can move the gold from one corner of the warehouse to the next corner of the warehouse. But at the end of the day, you don't know how many people have claims to that gold sitting there in that basement. So it's that's the beauty about Bitcoin. It is audited every 10 minutes. We know every 10 minutes when a new block is found, we know exactly where all the Bitcoin is and which addresses own how much. This is something that is simply impossible to do with gold. So whenever anybody says, oh, I want to have gold on the blockchain, well, you're just going to have the same exact problems that you have today, because gold is so hard to verify and keep track of on such a large scale.
You make another great point. We know exactly who owns the Bitcoin. We have no idea who owns the gold. The gold it's so opaque. It's not transparent. We don't know what's happening. There's rumors circulating that China's squatting on something like 20,000 metric tons of gold, despite officially saying, hey, we've only got 1,800. So again, there's a lot of rumors and a lot of really good data that actually suggests that China is sitting on 10x the gold that they are sitting on. So I think it's really interesting that Trump wants to audit the Fort Knox reserve of gold. I want to talk about that in a moment, because I think that could open up a whole nother rabbit hole. But this is what you're talking about, Rob. Traders are moving so much gold from the Bank of England to the US to avoid Trump's tariffs that the waiting times have reportedly octupled. Is that even how you say that word? And what is that? Is that an 8x?
8x. That's an 8x. And I think this whole tariff story is just a cover. I think it's giving an excuse for them to move this gold back. But I think that there's been a call from the highest levels of the Trump administration that any gold we own or have claims to, we want it on our territory, because there's more than one person who thinks that they own the same amount of gold. So we want it within our jurisdiction, and you're going to have to come send your warships over like Charles de Gaulle to try to steal it back from us. And it's interesting that, as you said, that Elon wants to audit Fort Knox, which supposedly holds 5,000 tons of gold, more than half of America's supposed entire stash. And the problem here is that Fort Knox hasn't been audited in 50 years. They haven't done a full audit since the 1950s, right? And so that's over 70 years. This could be a big problem, right? That Fort Knox, that fort could be empty. I heard a funny quip today online. The president goes to Fort Knox and says, "Guard, let me see how much gold we have." The guard says, "Can't do that, sir." "Let me see how much gold we have." "We can't do that, sir." And he says, "Why?" "Because we don't have any." And the president says, "Okay, double the amount of guards." It's with gold, you don't know. It's it's a trust game. Gold is a trust game, especially when it's all sitting in one place in one vault and no one's taken a look at it in over 50 years.
And now maybe we're going to find out how much gold is there, because as we can see, Elon Musk's Doge prepares to audit the gold reserve at Fort Knox.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, a lot of gold bugs have said that the gold hasn't been there for decades. And then there's some other people who say, well, what if they find that there's more gold than we actually said we had? So we don't know. That's the thing. It's Schrodinger's gold at this point, right? It could be there, it could not be there. And it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And I mean, also speaking of gold, the gold that we have on our balance sheet for America, it's all marked to the 1970s price, which is $42 an ounce. Whereas the modern price right now, it's $2,900 an ounce. So there's talk of if we do audit this gold and we see it's all there, then they would market to market and create a line item at the for the Treasury to borrow against from the Fed for over $800 billion. What would they use that $800 billion for? Well, that's what Cynthia Lummis wants to use to purchase up to 1 million Bitcoin through the Bitcoin Act. But there's other initiatives that are underway, such as the Sovereign Wealth Fund too, right? So the Sovereign Wealth Fund needs to get funded. Is that where they're going to find the money for that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you raise about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, because I think we are going to be talking about the Sovereign Wealth Fund here in a moment. But that's also a misconception about Cynthia Lummis's bill about the Bitcoin that she wants to buy. We don't even have to print any more money to buy the Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of all accounting gimmicks and tricks. I mean, right now the gold is not mark to market, right? We're sort of missing out on the opportunity to leverage that gold if we actually do have it. So it makes sense that why we would want to have it valued at $2,900 instead of $42. But at the end of the day, we're returning to a hard money world, and we need that Bitcoin, we need that gold. In order for the currency to really be worth its weight. So let's see what happens.
I might put you on the spot here, Rob. I want your honest thoughts. Do you think we can ever return to a gold standard? And if so, or if not, what are the probabilities of us seeing a gold standard? Do you think it's more likely than a Bitcoin standard?
No, I think the reason that we're in the pickle that we're in today is because gold doesn't work in the modern world, right? We need fast transactions. We need the total supply to be verified at least every 10 minutes, like in the case with Bitcoin. So we went into a fiat world because the transactions were too slow with gold dating back hundreds of years, right? Lynn Alden in Broken Money says that as we had greater communication leaps in technology, we needed faster transaction speeds, and that gold couldn't do it. So we transitioned to paper fiat and then to digital credit, right? And so we've got numbers going back and forth on a screen endlessly. But the real beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it is a secure, immutable ledger. And when those numbers go back and forth on the Bitcoin ledger, that's forever. There's no clawbacks. There's no getting that Bitcoin back once it's sent to a different address, unless the person with those private keys decides to send it to you. So yeah, do I think we're going back to a gold standard? No, but I think that gold will still have somewhat of a place for central banks, as we've seen for the last couple of years, them trying to gob it all up. And and I think Bitcoin will have a larger and larger role. I mean, we're still only a $2 trillion asset, right? We got a 9x to match gold. And I think that it's going to absorb the monetary premium of a lot of other assets in the meantime.
What do you think are one of those assets that's most at risk of being absorbed by Bitcoin?
Real estate, of course, real estate. Yeah, people have just turned housing into a way to defend their purchasing power, while the house that you live in itself has not gotten any more valuable. It doesn't keep you any warmer than it did 50 years ago. It doesn't protect you from the rain any more than it did 50 years ago. And yet its price has gone up 10x, right? And that's simply because people are looking for a way to maintain their purchasing power before they have found Bitcoin.
I tend to agree. I think the $300+ trillion real estate market is going to be in for a little bit of a rude shock when people begin to realize just how good digital gold is and digital real estate. Some people call Bitcoin digital real estate. It really is the best property that you can ever own. And we're watching people slowly but surely come to that realization that, you know, Bitcoin, there is no second best, and everybody is scrambling to get exposure to Bitcoin in any way, shape, or form that they can. Now, I think